What occurs when the individual you embarrass turns out to be your CEO? These employees just discovered this truth the hard way. As the elevator doors glided open, he emerged, wielding a mop in one hand and a bucket in the other. His reflection stared back at him from the sleek glass panels of the corporate headquarters, a building he owned, though no one was aware of that fact. Not yet. Nathaniel Brooks had dedicated years to ascending the corporate ladder, shattering barriers and demonstrating his value in an industry that had long overlooked men like him. Now, as the newly appointed CEO of Westbridge in coal marketing, he was entering his own company for the first time. However, instead of donning a tailored suit and polished shoes, he was dressed in worn work trousers and scuffed sneakers, with a name tag pinned to his chest reading Nate, Janitorial Staff. This disguise wasn't about theatrics. It was about unveiling the truth. Nathaniel had caught wind of rumors suggesting that the company's glossy image concealed something decaying beneath the surface. Employees murmured about a toxic culture, rampant arrogance at the top, and a blatant disrespect for those in lower positions. He needed to witness this for himself, so he left his boardroom title behind and walked in as a man no one would notice. The lobby was immaculate, featuring marble floors and contemporary furniture, with a faint aroma of espresso wafting from the in-house cafe. At the front desk, a receptionist scrolled through her phone, barely lifting her gaze. "Custodial offices are on the lower level," she muttered, gesturing towards the service elevator. He thanked her, but she didn't respond, pushing her mop bucket down the hall. Nathaniel moved past well-dressed employees engaged in conversations filled with campaign strategies, client negotiations, and weekend plans. No one truly acknowledged him. Then came the first indication of the prevailing atmosphere. Two junior executives, Ryan Caldwell and Brad Simmons, stood by the break room, laughing about something. As Nathaniel walked by, he overheard a phrase that made him halt. "Can't believe HR keeps hiring guys like that. Corporates got to meet their diversity quotas somehow." Laughter erupted, accompanied by a smirk and a glance in his direction. Nathaniel continued on, his grip tightening around the mop handle. But that wasn't the most troubling part. The third floor housed the marketing department, the creative heart of the company. A group of employees congregated near the conference room, sipping coffee and exchanging office gossip. As Nathaniel reached for a trash bin, someone stuck out a foot, causing the bucket to jerk forward and water to slosh onto the floor. A ripple of laughter ensued. "Watch it, man," said Chase Donovan, one of the senior managers, who didn't even look at Nathaniel as he wiped at his expensive shoes with a smirk. "My bad," Nathaniel replied evenly, grabbing paper towels. Chase turned to the others, saying, "I swear they'll hire anyone these days." The group chuckled, and one woman in a fitted blazer whispered, "Seriously, does he even speak English?" Nathaniel met her gaze, and she didn't look away. He had seen enough. For the next few hours, Nathaniel listened more than he cleaned. Every whispered insult, every dismissive glance, and every smug smirk were etched into his memory. However, some individuals stood out. A young assistant, Melanie Torres, offered him a small smile as she passed, and James Holloway, a veteran employee, thanked him when Nathaniel emptied his trash. Small gestures, but significant. As the day wore on, Nathaniel's resolution crystallized. This was not merely about leadership. It was about justice. But first, he needed to determine just how deep the corruption ran. Returning the mop to the janitor's closet, he leaned against the wall, inhaling the strong scent of bleach. But his thoughts were elsewhere. What he had witnessed in just a few hours confirmed everything. Disrespect, arrogance, and a sense of entitlement that spread like mold. Yet, he wasn't finished. He needed to dig deeper. When noon arrived, employees filed into the cafeteria on the 5th floor, a sleek open concept space with floor-to-ceiling windows. Nathaniel maneuvered through the crowd, pushing a cart of cleaning supplies, providing him the perfect vantage point. He paused near a table where Ryan Caldwell, Brad Simmons, and Chase Donovan sat together. Their conversation flowed easily until he got close. Chase nudged Brad, tilting his head toward Nathaniel. "Man, imagine working a job like that. No stress, no deadlines, just mop and go." Ryan leaned back in his chair, barely concealing his amusement. "Bet they don't even check resumes for those positions." The trio laughed, as if Nathaniel wasn't standing right there. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if they would speak this way if they knew who he truly was, if they realized the real boss was watching. But the answer didn't matter. They didn't see him as a person, only as a role, and that was their error. Nathaniel turned to grab a tray from a nearby table when someone bumped into him hard. He managed to steady himself before the cart tipped over, but a few cleaning bottles tumbled to the floor. "Oh, come on," a voice groaned. Looking up, he saw Vanessa Langley, the VP of Marketing, clad in a sharp suit and high heels, exuding the aura of someone who earned six figures and knew it. She glared at the scattered supplies as if they had personally offended her. "Can you pick that up?" "Some of us don't have time for this mess," she snapped. Nathaniel crouched slowly, gathering the bottles. Vanessa sighed, checking her phone. "You know," she added, "if you actually cleaned this place instead of standing around, you wouldn't be in people's way." Nathaniel maintained a steady voice, replying, "Just doing my job." Vanessa rolled her eyes and walked away. Not a single person intervened. Not one co-worker called her out. The silence spoke volumes. Not everyone was like that. While Nathaniel refilled a soap dispenser near the sinks, Melanie Torres approached. She hesitated before handing him a folded napkin. "Hey, someone left this at my desk, but I think it's for you." Nathaniel opened it to find neat handwriting that read, "Not everyone here is like them. I see you. I respect you." His chest tightened. He looked up, but Melanie was already walking away. It was the first act of kindness he had received all day, but kindness alone wouldn't rectify a company poisoned from within. By late afternoon, Nathaniel found himself in the executive lounge, wiping down tables. Nearby, a group of managers stood with coffee cups in hand, discussing the upcoming quarterly review. Then one sentence made him stop. "I heard the new CEO is supposed to start next week," said a man in a navy suit, Keith Morrison, the director of operations. Vanessa scoffed. "Ugh, I saw his picture. Let's just say he's not exactly the executive type." Chase leaned in. "Oh, yeah? What's he like?" Vanessa took a slow sip of her coffee, then smirked. "Let's just say if he walked in here right now, half of us would probably hand him a mop." Nathaniel exhaled through his nose. It was time for action, but first, he needed to ensure they felt just as comfortable saying it to his face. Nathaniel had seen enough. He had listened, observed, and allowed them to reveal their true selves. Now it was time to escalate things further. He wanted to uncover just how deep this rot ran, so he resolved to make himself impossible to overlook. The following morning, Nathaniel wheeled his mop bucket directly into the executive boardroom, where a major client meeting was set to commence. The long glass table gleamed under the bright overhead lights, and high-level executives were already seated, reviewing notes, sipping coffee, and adjusting their ties. Nathaniel feigned ignorance as he calmly dragged the mop across the floor, moving slowly, too slowly. Chase Donovan was the first to react. "You're kidding, right?" Chase dropped his pen, looking at the others as if this was some sort of joke. "Is this really the best time for janitorial service?" Nathaniel didn't respond. He simply kept working. Vanessa Langley sighed dramatically. "Unbelievable." Keith Morrison slammed the folder shut. "We don't have time for this." "Hey!" He snapped his fingers. "Can't this wait?" Nathaniel paused, looking up as if he had just noticed them. "Oh, I thought this was my job." A few people snickered. Chase leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, do your job somewhere else. We're kind of running a company here." Nathaniel tilted his head. "Are you?" Chase's smirk faltered. "Excuse me?" Nathaniel held his gaze for a long moment. Then, without another word, he grabbed his mop bucket and slowly walked out. He could feel their irritation, their amusement, and the quiet disdain, and that was exactly what he wanted. For the next few hours, Nathaniel made himself highly visible. He cleaned the glass doors just a tad too long, forcing people to walk around him. He moved through the halls at the most inconvenient moments, compelling senior staff to acknowledge him. He observed their faces tighten upon seeing him, the impatience, the irritation. He overheard whispers. "He's still here. Doesn't he have work to do? Why does he keep looking at us?" At one point, Vanessa walked by, her heels clicking against the floor. She slowed, giving him a long, deliberate once-over. "You don't seem very efficient," she remarked. "Maybe this isn't the right company for you." Nathaniel smiled. "Oh, I think I'm exactly where I need to be." She blinked, as if something in his tone had thrown her off. But before she could respond, he grabbed his cart and moved down the hall. By the end of the day, Nathaniel had gathered all the information he needed. The worst employees had revealed themselves. They had dug their own graves. The good ones, like Melanie Torres and James Holloway, had also distinguished themselves. There were only a handful of them. Too few, but they existed, and that mattered. Nathaniel stepped into the executive lobby, his reflection staring back at him in the glass doors. He reached up, pinned the janitor's badge, and tossed it into the trash. Tomorrow, he wouldn't be invisible anymore. But before he made his move, he needed to ensure they were completely unprepared. The next morning, the energy in the office felt the same. Casual arrogance, fake smiles, and a hum of important-sounding conversations. Yet something was different. Nathaniel wasn't invisible anymore. Dressed in a tailored suit, he stepped off the private elevator on the top floor of Westbridge in coal marketing. No mop, no bucket, no faded work shirt. It was time. The executive meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. Every major department head was already seated when Nathaniel walked in. For the first time, every eye in the room turned toward him. Silence followed, brows furrowed in confusion, recognition, then disbelief. Chase Donovan, who had sneered at him in the hallways, sat slack-jawed. Vanessa Langley, who had dismissed him in the cafeteria, straightened in her seat, her face frozen. Keith Morrison leaned forward. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Nathaniel allowed the moment to breathe, then stepped toward the head of the table, placing both hands on the polished wood. "Nathaniel Brooks," he said calmly, "your new CEO." Silence. No one moved. Then came a shift, a scramble to fix their expressions and recover from the shock. Vanessa's smile was tight, forced. "Oh, Mr. Brooks, we—" Nathaniel raised a hand, and she fell silent immediately. He pulled out a chair and sat down. "Let's discuss the culture of this company." Nathaniel had evidence. He spent the next 20 minutes recounting everything he had witnessed. The whispered insults, the disrespect, the way people laughed at, ignored, or belittled anyone they deemed beneath them. Every word struck its target. Some employees shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided his gaze, while a few, like Melanie Torres and James Holloway, sat with their heads held high, having nothing to be ashamed of. Nathaniel turned his attention to Chase. "Tell me something," he said, tilting his head. "Do you still think this company is being forced to hire people like me?" Chase's face drained of color. He didn't respond. He had no answer. Nathaniel leaned back. "That's what I thought." Then he turned to Vanessa. "And you," he said slowly, "I believe you told me I wasn't efficient enough for this company. Do you still feel that way?" Vanessa's fingers curled into her lap. Silence enveloped the room. Nathaniel scanned the faces around him. Anyone else? No one spoke, for they all knew what was coming. Nathaniel pushed back on the table and stood. "Effective immediately," he declared. "This company will undergo a complete restructuring." The executive stiffened. "Some of you," he continued, looking directly at the worst offenders, "won't be here to witness it." Panic flashed across their faces, and people exchanged glances as if waiting for someone to protest. No one did. Nathaniel reached for the remote, turned on the conference room monitor, and clicked play. Security footage from the office played on the screen. Audio clips of insults and conversations captured in crystal clear detail. Proof of the company's toxic underbelly. Ryan Caldwell sank in his chair. Chase wiped a hand over his mouth, and Vanessa's knuckles turned white. There was no way to talk their way out of this. And the worst part? He wasn't even finished yet. The silence in the room was thick, uncomfortable. The screen in front of them kept playing unedited, unfiltered evidence. Vanessa Langley was seen shifting her coffee, rolling her eyes as she mocked Nathaniel. Chase Donovan was captured laughing with his buddies about diversity hires. Keith Morrison was shown snapping his fingers at Nathaniel like he was a dog. Every word, every action documented. Nathaniel let it play for a few more seconds, allowing the weight of it to settle in the room. No one dared look at him now. He clicked the screen off, and the dead silence persisted. Nathaniel Brooks, he said, clasping his hands behind his back. Vanessa, Chase, Ryan, Keith. He let the names linger in the air. All four stiffened. You no longer work here. Chase sat up, exclaiming, "Wait, hold on." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. Did you have something to say? Chase opened his mouth, then closed it. Vanessa inhaled sharply. Mr. Brooks, surely you had no problem judging people by their job titles yesterday. Nathaniel interjected smoothly. So let's see how you feel when yours no longer exists. Her complexion paled. Nathaniel turned to the others. Your severance will reflect your contracts. But let's be clear, this isn't negotiable. I expect you to pack up by noon. Keith Morrison was already sweating. Ryan Caldwell looked as though he might be sick. It didn't matter. They had built their careers on stepping over others, and now they had to face the consequences. Nathaniel directed his gaze to the rest of the room, those who weren't getting fired. Some of you are staying, he said, his voice calm and measured. Not because you're perfect, but because I believe you can do better. A few people exhaled in relief, while others still appeared terrified. Good. That meant they were paying attention. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. This company will no longer reward arrogance over ability. No more backroom deals. No more playing favorites. If you think your title gives you the right to treat people like trash, he paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, then start packing now. No one moved. Nathaniel straightened, buttoned his jacket, and stepped back. This is your one and only warning. As Nathaniel turned to leave, he caught Melanie Torres watching him. She looked stunned, as if she couldn't believe this was real. Nathaniel offered her a small nod. She had been one of the few good ones. And she wasn't alone. James Holloway, Nathaniel said, glancing at the veteran employee. You're being promoted effective immediately. James blinked, and then his expression shifted from shock to gratitude. Nathaniel turned back to Melanie. And you, he said, my office this afternoon. Melanie's lips parted. Sir, You deserve better, Nathaniel stated simply. Let's discuss your future here. For the first time that morning, someone smiled. Nathaniel walked toward the exit, leaving behind the astonished boardroom. The firings weren't personal. They were necessary. Westbridge and Cole had thrived on a toxic foundation, and that ended today. As he stepped into his new office, Nathaniel exhaled. This was just the beginning. But there was one final thing he needed to convey before this narrative concluded. The news spread through the building like wildfire. By the time Nathaniel reached his office, employees were already whispering, some in shock, others in quiet satisfaction. The firings weren't merely a shakeup, they were a reckoning. However, there was still work to be done. Downstairs, security escorted Chase, Vanessa, Ryan, and Keith out of the building. Chase kept his head down, jaw clenched so tightly he looked ready to shatter his teeth. Ryan wouldn't meet anyone's gaze, and Keith muttered under his breath, likely concocting some excuse for his wife later. Vanessa, however, refused to exit quietly. I built this department, she snapped at the guard beside her. I dedicated years of my life to this company. And for what? To be humiliated like this. People paused to watch her, but none offered sympathy, not from her team nor her peers, because everyone had witnessed the footage. They had seen how she treated others. She wasn't a victim. She was a consequence. The doors clicked shut behind them. Westbridge and Cole had just lost 4 executives, but for the first time in years, the atmosphere felt lighter. Nathaniel sat behind his desk, his desk, leaning back in the chair and exhaling slowly. A long road lay ahead. Policies to rewrite, promotions to consider, and hiring decisions to make. Cleaning house was one thing. Building something better was another. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he said. Melanie Torres stepped inside, her hands clasped in front of her. You wanted to see me, sir? Nathaniel gestured to the chair across from him. Take a seat. She hesitated, as if still unsure this was real. He understood. People like Vanessa and Chase had constructed a company where individuals like Melanie had no voice. That was over. I saw your work, he began. The reports you put together, the project you were assigned. He leaned forward. And the ones you weren't. Melanie swallowed hard. You should have been promoted years ago, he stated firmly. Her eyes widened. I'm correcting that mistake. He tapped a folder on his desk. Effective immediately, you're the new director of client relations. Melanie stared at him, then slowly covered her mouth with her hands. Are you serious? Nathaniel smiled. Completely. Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head, laughing softly. I don't even know what to say. Then don't say anything yet, he replied, leaning back. Just get ready. We have a lot of work to do. Melanie nodded quickly, still stunned. Yes, sir. As she left, Nathaniel glanced out the window. The company is only as strong as the people who run it. For too long, the wrong individuals had been in charge. Now, that was about to change. But the real lesson wasn't just for the company. It was for everyone watching. Nathaniel stepped out of his office and into the open floor of Westbridge & Cole. This company had been his for less than 48 hours, but the shift was already underway. Conversations were quieter, and employees worked with a different energy, not fear, but awareness. Some were relieved, while others were still in shock. Good. That meant they were paying attention. At 4 p.m. sharp, Nathaniel called for an all-hands meeting. No fancy boardroom this time. No sitting behind closed doors with executives. This meeting was for everyone. The main conference hall was packed, with employees standing along the walls, whispering among themselves. They all wanted answers. Nathaniel walked to the front. No notes, no teleprompter, just the truth. I'm not here to waste your time, he began, his voice steady. So let's get right to it. The room fell silent. You've seen what happened today. Some people left. Some people stayed. Some of you are wondering what's next. He let the words settle. This company is not broken, but the way it's been run, he shook his head. That stops now. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and a few heads nodded in agreement. Nathaniel looked across the room, his expression firm but calm. If you spent years stepping on people to climb this ladder, this will be a difficult place for you moving forward. But if you're here to work, to grow, to actually contribute, this will be the best company you've ever been a part of. A beat of silence followed. Then someone clapped. It was James Holloway. A moment later, Melanie joined in, then another and another, until the room filled with applause. Nathaniel gave a small nod. The message had been received. As the employees left, Nathaniel stood by the exit, watching them file out. Some still looked uncertain. Change was never easy, but then a young intern, barely out of college and likely used to being overlooked, stopped. Sir, Nathaniel turned. The intern hesitated before speaking carefully. I just want to say, this is the first time I felt like someone in charge actually sees us. Nathaniel studied him for a second, then smiled. Then, that means I'm doing my job. The intern grinned, nodded, and walked out. And just like that, Nathaniel knew this company was going to be different. People often love to judge others by their titles, their clothes, their status. They assume that what you do for a living defines your worth. But the truth is, character will always matter more than a paycheck. When the dust settles, when the game is over, it's not the title that defines you. It's how you treat people when you think no one is watching. If this story made you think, if it made you question how we treat people in everyday life, then share it. Because respect isn't just for the powerful, it's for everyone. And sometimes, the person you ignore today might be the one signing your paycheck tomorrow.